The turkey was still steaming on the table when my father pointed at me and shouted, "Get out of my house. You don't belong here." I stood frozen, a glass of wine in my hand, staring at the faces of my cousins, my siblings, my so-called family. Not one of them spoke up for me. Not one. What none of them knew, though, was that the girl they just kicked out owned more than all of them combined. $94 million to be exact. And in that moment, I decided they would never see a cent of it again. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or treated like the black sheep in your own family, then you're going to love what happens in this story. Smash that like button, subscribe, and get ready for one of the most satisfying revenge stories you'll ever hear. Because trust me, this Thanksgiving turned into a reckoning they never saw coming. My name is Amelia Parker. I'm 27 years old, and for most of my life, I was the invisible daughter. The afterthought. The disappointment. If you asked my father, Richard Parker, he'd probably describe me as the quiet one or the one who never did much. The irony? I was the one who did everything. From age 16, I worked 2 jobs. First as a waitress at a diner, then as a cashier at a grocery store, to pay for my own books, my own clothes, even my college applications. My siblings? Their credit cards were handed to them like candy. My brother, Jake, crashed 3 cars before he was 21, and Dad just bought him a new one each time. My sister, Lily, dropped out of 2 private universities before finally landing in a cushy PR job. Dad pulled strings to get her. And me? The forgotten daughter. I wasn't offered a dime. But here's the twist. They thought my silence meant weakness. They thought my independence was proof I couldn't succeed. They had no idea what I was quietly building behind the scenes. This year's Thanksgiving was supposed to be different. I had just sold one of my startups, a software company I built from scratch, for a mind-blowing $94 million. But I hadn't told anyone yet. I wanted to. Part of me longed for the validation, the look on my father's face when he realized the useless one had surpassed them all. But deep down, I knew they didn't deserve to know. Not yet. Still, I showed up to dinner that night, trying to play the dutiful daughter. The house smelled like roasted turkey and sweet potatoes. Laughter spilled from the dining room as cousins swapped stories about vacations in Europe and new promotions. I stood there in the doorway, holding a bottle of wine I had carefully chosen, my heart thudding nervously in my chest. "Amelia," my mother said flatly when she noticed me. No hug. No warmth. Just my name, like she was checking me off a guest list. Dad didn't even look up from carving the turkey. I took a seat at the far end of the table, next to the kids section. I tried not to mind. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat when my younger cousin leaned over and whispered, "Why are you sitting here? This is for us." It started with small comments, as it always did. "Amelia, are you still working at that little place?" my aunt asked, wrinkling her nose. I wanted to laugh. That little place? My last little place had just been acquired by one of the largest firms in Silicon Valley. But, of course, she didn't know. None of them did. Dad chuckled, shaking his head. She's still trying to find her path. Not everyone's cut out for success. The table erupted in polite laughter. I felt heat creep up my neck. Then my brother Jake chimed in, smirking. "At least she can cook. Maybe Amelia can work as a caterer for Lily's office events." Lily giggled into her glass of champagne. I wanted to scream, to slam my hands on the table and shout, "I'm worth $94 million. I could buy and sell all of you 10 times over." But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I clenched my fists under the table and forced a tight smile. The meal went on, and the jabs kept coming. My cheap dress, my quiet life, my lack of ambition. Each word felt like a dagger. Finally, it happened. I had just stood up to refill my glass when Dad's voice cut through the chatter like a whip. "You know what, Amelia? Why don't you just leave? You've done nothing but sulk since you got here. You bring down the mood. This family doesn't need your negativity tonight." The room fell silent. Forks clinked against plates. My mother looked away. My siblings smirked. And then Dad added the final blow. "You're not part of this family anymore." I stood there frozen, my hands shaking so badly the wine sloshed onto the tablecloth. My chest felt like it was caving in. Every instinct screamed at me to beg, to argue, to demand a place at that table. But instead, I smiled. "All right," I said softly. My voice didn't crack, even though my heart did. "If that's what you want." I set the glass down, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the cold November night. They thought they had erased me. They thought they had finally broken me. What they didn't know is that I had already erased them. Because weeks earlier I had discovered something, and it was about to turn this entire family upside down. I didn't cry that night. At least, not right away. The cold November air bit at my cheeks as I walked to my car, the laughter of my family muffled behind the Parker mansion's thick walls. 4 years. Their approval had been my prison, their love something I chased like a starving dog. But as I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, a strange calm settled over me. I realized something. I didn't need them. They needed me. 3 years earlier, I had taken every ounce of pain, rejection, and humiliation this family fed me and turned it into fuel. While they mocked me for being quiet, I was coding late into the night, building platforms people didn't believe in, until investors did. My first company, Nexus Stream, had been dismissed as a silly project. By the time I sold it, it was valued at over $40 million. My second startup, EchoSoft, sold 6 months ago for another $54 million. Combined, $94 million. Money I had kept hidden. Not out of shame, but out of caution. I knew if my family ever smelled even a whiff of my success, they'd come swarming like vultures. And oh, I had been right. See, my father prided himself on being a businessman. In reality, he was reckless. Always juggling investments, always relying on family wealth to keep the house, the cars, the image alive. And because he thought I was the invisible one, he gave me a role he didn't give my siblings, quiet accountant of certain family accounts. It was a task he didn't respect, one he thought beneath him, managing the tedious but necessary transfers, upkeep, and taxes. He never imagined I'd use that access to see everything. Every loan, every overdraft, every desperate transfer from one cousin's trust fund to cover another's splurges. By the time I was 25, I realized the Parker family fortune was a hollow shell. They weren't rich, they were pretending. And without the accounts I quietly kept balanced, the whole illusion would have collapsed years ago. Sitting in my car that night, my father's words echoing, "You're not part of this family anymore," I laughed for the first time in years. Not a joyful laugh. A sharp, bitter laugh that fogged up my windshield. He had no idea that the useless daughter was the only reason his little empire hadn't already crumbled. And if I wasn't part of this family anymore, well, why should I keep protecting them? The next morning, I made coffee in my apartment and opened my laptop. I stared at the long list of accounts I'd been quietly tending to for years. I hovered over the screen, my fingers trembling, not with fear, but with exhilaration. One click. That's all it would take to stop authorizing transfers. One click to stop plugging the leaks in their sinking ship. I didn't need to drain their accounts. I didn't need to touch a cent of their money. All I had to do was step away. And when I did, the entire Parker family would feel it. I started small. I stopped covering one of my father's business expenses, a luxury car lease under the company's name. Within a week, I got an angry voicemail from him. "Amelia, what the hell is going on? The dealership is calling me saying payments haven't cleared. Fix it. Immediately." I listened to it 3 times, each time smiling wider. No please. No acknowledgement. Just barking orders like always. I deleted the voicemail. And that was the moment I knew. It was time to go all in. I wasn't going to storm back into that mansion waving bank statements. That would be too easy. Too dramatic. No, real revenge was quieter. Colder. It was letting them destroy themselves without my help. So I withdrew completely. I cut off every auto transfer. I stopped covering their credit shortfalls. I blocked access to the account dashboards I had quietly created to keep them afloat. One by one, the safety nets disappeared. And I sat back, sipping my coffee, waiting for the storm to hit. At first, I wondered if guilt would come. After all, they were still my family. But then I replayed Thanksgiving in my head, the laughter at my expense, the smugness in Jake's smirk, the way Dad had dismissed me like trash. And instead of guilt, I felt power. For the first time, I was in control. They had kicked me out, erased me. But soon, they would realize I was the one holding the keys all along. 2 weeks later, it began. Aunt Margaret called me, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Darling, could you help your father sort out some financial hiccups? He says the accounts are acting funny." I almost choked on my tea. Funny. That's one way to put it. "I'm sorry, Aunt Margaret," I said, my tone sugary. "Dad told me I'm not part of the family anymore. I wouldn't want to interfere." The silence on the other end was delicious. Every day, another little crack appeared. Cousin Ryan's tuition payment bounced. My sister Lily's corporate expense card was declined at a client dinner. Uncle George's mortgage autopay stopped, and foreclosure letters began arriving. And me? I went about my life. Quietly, peacefully, investing my millions, working on new projects, sipping lattes in cafes while their world unraveled. The best part? They still didn't know. They thought the banks were failing them. The companies. Each other. They had no idea the invisible daughter they had mocked into silence was the one pulling every invisible string. When December rolled in, the cracks turned into craters. My phone lit up daily with unknown numbers, voicemails stacking one after the other. Some were angry, some were desperate, some were dripping with fake affection. My father's voice was the loudest. The same man who had stood in front of our entire family and disowned me on Thanksgiving was now calling at 2 a.m, demanding I fix the mess. His tone hadn't changed. Still commanding, still arrogant, as if I was his secretary instead of his daughter. I ignored them all. Christmas Eve came, and for the first time in years, I didn't drag myself to that suffocating mansion. I stayed home in my apartment, curled on the couch with a blanket, drinking hot cocoa and watching snow fall outside my window. I told myself I'd feel lonely, but instead, I felt free. The weight I had carried for years, the desperate need for their approval, was gone. Every call I ignored was like another brick being pulled out from the fortress they had built around me. But the fortress was collapsing on them now. By January, the Parkers' reputation in our community was unraveling. Jake's friends whispered about how his fancy cars were being repossessed one by one. Lily's boss apparently caught wind of her family fortune being nothing but smoke, and she was suddenly very quiet at the office. My father's so-called business ventures were exposed for what they really were, shells propped up by borrowed money. With the safety nets gone, they were scrambling. I heard through the grapevine that they even tried to shift blame onto me. At some family gathering I wasn't invited to, Dad apparently told everyone I had sabotaged the accounts out of spite. The irony almost made me laugh out loud. He wanted them to believe I had gone rogue, a vindictive daughter cutting her family off. He wasn't entirely wrong, but what he didn't know was that I hadn't touched a cent of their money. I had simply stopped saving them from themselves. The more desperate they became, the bolder their attempts were to get me back into their circle. My sister showed up at my apartment one evening, wearing a fur coat and a look of fake concern. She hugged herself against the cold as she stood at my door, her lips painted the exact shade of crimson she always wore to family dinners. "Amelia, can we talk? Dad's under so much stress. You know you're good with numbers. Can't you just smooth things out for him?" Her eyes flickered with panic, though she tried to mask it with a practiced smile. For a second, I almost saw the little sister I used to protect when we were kids. But then I remembered her laughter at Thanksgiving, the way she had joined in the chorus of mocking me. That memory hardened me like stone. "I'm sorry, Lily," I said evenly. Dad made it very clear. "I'm not part of this family anymore." She flinched like I had slapped her. For once, she had no clever comeback. She left without another word, her heels clicking sharply down the hallway. After that, they stopped pretending. The messages turned venomous. Accusations, threats, guilt trips. My father left a voicemail saying he'd cut me out of his will, as if I cared. Jake sent texts calling me selfish, a traitor, ungrateful. My mother even tried the martyr act, telling me I was breaking her heart, that a true daughter would never abandon her family. The old me might have cracked under that. The old me might have gone running back, apologizing, begging for scraps of affection. But this new me, the one who had tasted freedom, power, and self-respect? She just smiled. Every insult, every guilt trip only proved one thing. They weren't grieving my absence. They were grieving their safety net. The news of their downfall spread fast. Neighbors whispered. Colleagues distanced themselves. Friends vanished. The Parkers, once seen as untouchable, were suddenly the punchline of whispered conversations at country clubs and charity galas. I didn't even have to lift a finger to ruin them. They were doing it themselves. But as satisfying as it was to watch from the sidelines, I knew this was only the beginning. I had been erased from their family, mocked and humiliated, cast out like trash, and now I had the means to do more than just watch. It was time to take the revenge further, to make sure they understood. Not only had they lost me, but they had lost every chance they ever had of using me again. I decided the real revenge couldn't just be me ignoring their calls or letting them collapse quietly. No, that would be too merciful. They had humiliated me in front of everyone on Thanksgiving night. My father had stood tall at the head of that table and erased me with one cruel sentence. If justice meant anything, they needed to feel that same humiliation, publicly, inescapably, with no way to twist the story in their favor. So I waited. I knew their annual Parker Foundation Gala was coming up in February, a grand event they used to host every year. It was their way of parading their so-called wealth, inviting business partners, distant relatives, even politicians. I had been to a few as a teenager, standing awkwardly in the corner while my siblings took turns on stage, being introduced as future heirs of the Parker legacy. I remembered how my father had once brushed me aside at the podium when I tried to join them. Not you, Amelia. This isn't your role. This year, I wouldn't need his permission. I bought a ticket anonymously, slipping into the venue dressed in a sleek black gown that turned more than a few heads. I kept my hair pinned back, my makeup sharp, my posture tall. I didn't look like the invisible daughter anymore. I looked like power. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the tables set with crystal and silver. But beneath the shine, I could see the cracks. Fewer waitstaff than usual. Cheaper wine poured into expensive bottles, nervous whispers circulating about unpaid vendors. The Parkers were still trying to keep up appearances, but it was unraveling right in front of everyone. When my father stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, I watched him struggle. His once booming confidence was cracked, his suit just a little too loose on him, his smile too forced. He spoke of strong family values and a legacy of success, but even from the back of the room, I could hear the strain in his voice. That's when I made my move. I walked toward the front, each step echoing like a drumbeat. Conversations hushed. Heads turned. My father froze when he saw me. His face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like he had seen a ghost. "Amelia," he said into the mic, his voice cracking. The crowd stirred. Whispers spread like wildfire. The disowned daughter had appeared. I didn't wait for an invitation. I took the microphone right out of his hand. My fingers didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. "Good evening, everyone," I said, letting the silence stretch, letting every eye settle on me. Some of you might remember me as the forgotten Parker. The one who was told she wasn't part of this family anymore. The one they erased. Gasps rippled through the audience. My mother shifted uncomfortably at the head table, Lily's face burned red, and Jake clenched his jaw so hard I thought his teeth might break. But here's the funny thing, I continued, my lips curving into a smile. While they were busy pretending to be successful, I was building something real. I sold my second company last year for $94 million. And while they laughed at me for being useless, I was quietly the one keeping their accounts alive, covering their debts, patching up their messes. Until the day they told me I didn't belong. So I stopped. And now, well, you can see the results for yourself. The room exploded with murmurs, shocked gasps, even laughter from a few corners. My father tried to grab the microphone back, but I held it firm, my eyes locked on his. "You taught me, Dad," I said clearly, my voice carrying through the hall. "You taught me that I wasn't part of this family. So I believed you. And I acted like it. I cut every tie, every transfer, every safety net. You erased me, and I erased you right back." The silence that followed was heavy. You could hear the weight of it pressing down on every Parker at that table. They weren't untouchable anymore. Their empire was exposed for what it was, a crumbling illusion held together by the daughter they had disowned. I handed the microphone back and walked off the stage to a sea of stunned faces. Some people looked at me with admiration, others with disbelief. But not one of them looked at my father with the respect he used to command. That was gone now. I didn't stay for the rest of the gala. I didn't need to. The damage was done. By the time I stepped into the cool February night, I knew the Parkers' reputation would never recover. By morning, every guest would be talking about the scandal. By next week, every business partner would be pulling out. Driving home, I finally allowed myself to breathe. Not the shallow, careful breaths of someone trying to hold back tears, but deep, steady breaths of someone who had just been set free. For days afterward, the calls didn't stop. This time, though, they weren't angry. They were desperate. Pleas for forgiveness. Promises to treat me differently. Even my mother's trembling voice asking me to think of the family name. But I had thought of the family name. I had thought of it every night I stayed up late building my companies. Every day I fought to prove my worth. Every holiday where I was reminded I wasn't enough. And I realized something. The Parker name had never protected me. It had only tried to chain me. So I ignored every plea. Weeks later, I read in the paper that the Parker estate had been sold to cover debts. My father's business empire had filed for bankruptcy. Jake had moved into a cramped apartment across town. Lily lost her PR job. My mother was spotted shopping at discount stores, her designer coats pawned off. I didn't feel joy watching them crumble. Not exactly. What I felt was something stronger, closure. For years, I had begged for their love. Now, they were begging for mine. And just like they turned me away on Thanksgiving, I turned them away now. That was my revenge. Not screaming, not stealing, not sinking to their level. Just living, succeeding, and letting the truth burn brighter than any lie they had ever told about me. The night of the gala stayed with me for a long time. Not because I felt guilty, not because I questioned my choices, but because for the first time in my life, I had stood tall in front of my family and spoken the truth. No more shrinking. No more silence. No more pretending that their approval was worth more than my self-respect. In the weeks that followed, I kept thinking about that Thanksgiving night. The smell of turkey, the laughter, the way my father's words had sliced through me. For a while, I thought that moment would haunt me forever. But now, when I replay it in my mind, it doesn't sting. Instead, it feels like the spark that lit the fire. The moment that pushed me to finally let go of people who had never valued me and embrace the woman I had become without them. My life looks different now. I don't spend holidays waiting for an invitation that never comes. I don't look at my phone hoping for approval hidden in a voicemail. My circle is smaller, but it's real. Friends who celebrate my victories. Colleagues who respect my talent. People who see me as I am, not as the shadow my family tried to trap me in. Do I miss them? Sometimes yes. Family is complicated, no matter how toxic it gets. There are nights when I think about my childhood, about the little girl who just wanted her father to say, "I'm proud of you." That girl still lives inside me somewhere. But I've learned something crucial. Validation that comes at the cost of your dignity isn't worth having. My revenge wasn't about money. It wasn't even about exposing them. It was about reclaiming myself. Every time I said no to their desperate calls, every time I chose silence over begging, I wasn't punishing them. I was freeing myself. And the lesson? Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't destruction. It's success. It's walking away and living a life so full, so undeniable, that the people who underestimated you are forced to sit in the ruins of their own choices while you rise. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, if you've ever been told you're not enough, let this story be a reminder. You don't need their permission to shine. You don't need their love to succeed. Sometimes, the greatest power you'll ever hold is the decision to stop chasing what was never meant for you. So no, I'll never go back to that mansion. I'll never beg to sit at that table again. Because I've built my own. And around it are people who actually deserve a seat. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button, subscribe, and share your own revenge story in the comments. I love reading them. And remember, success is the kind of revenge no one can take away from you.